For 48 years, the Head Start program has been the shining example of the ability of the federal government to do things well and to really make a difference in the lives of people. Now, a comprehensive study shows that Head Start has almost no lasting impact. Well, there goes $180 billion down the drain. But wait, there's more from where that came. I'm PJTV's Scott Ott, joined now by Stephen Green and Bill Whittle. Well, men, Congress told Health and Human Services to study the effectiveness of the federal government preschool program for low-income kids, measuring it by its own standards against a control group. They found that 4-year-olds who got Head Start weren't any farther ahead by the end of first grade than kids who didn't use the program. In other words, if the federal government stayed out of their lives, they would have been just as well off, and Barack Obama would have had an extra $8 billion per year to buy something nice. Now, Stephen Green, about 60% of the parents in the non-Head Start, the control group, sent their children to some kind of non-government preschool program. Isn't it unfair to Head Start to compare it to the private sector?
It's unfair to compare any government program to the private sector. Geez.
What he said.
I send my 2-year-old to a private preschool, and it's expensive. We think it's worth it because we saw real progress when we sent our now 7-year-old to the same thing before he started kindergarten. And it worked, but it wasn't as expensive as Head Start. We, as parents involved, had a lot more control over the decisions that were made and the things that were taught to our child. That is what gets you involved, is writing a check every month and feeling that pain and seeing the results or not seeing the results as the result of you writing that check. So we were happy to do it. When it's just this person or this building that you don't know who they are, you don't know where the money is coming from, but it's free, hey, great. Drop off the kid, go to work. No, it's not fair to make that comparison, Scott. It's not fair at all.
Well, Bill, the Head Start program got an extra billion, that's $1 billion in stimulus spending, and was able to serve 14,000 additional students and give raises to its teachers in 2009 and 2010. And the good news is the next year, when those stimulus dollars ran out, the regular program funding jumped by $1 billion to avoid tragic service cutbacks. So it stayed at about $8 billion in 2012. Aren't you worried that Republicans will use these study results to try to cut funding or to eliminate the Head Start program altogether just because it isn't working?
I was told there wouldn't be any math here, but honestly, if you take $1 billion, $1,000 million, and you cannot show an increase in ability among 14,000 kids for $1,000 million, I would simply ask, as I always do, to any single person watching this show, if you were given $1,000 million and asked to show improvement over 14,000 kids, which is just an astonishingly low turnout. The worst day at Dodger Stadium. When you look at Dodger Stadium and you see just a few people sprinkled throughout that building, that's 14,000 people. That's an awful day at a ballpark. If you had $1,000 million and you couldn't show improvement among 14,000 kids, this would then be your criteria for spending $1,000 million every year? This is the kind of madness in a nutshell that has bankrupted the richest country in the world and is driving all of us not only into the poorhouse, but the madhouse.
Now, in fairness to the Head Start people, the study period actually happened before the stimulus funding. So before that, Bill, they were only spending $7,000 million a year in order to try to get the results that they didn't get. Yeah. Steve, by a few measures, children entering kindergarten do a little better after Head Start. It's just that the benefit almost completely disappears after a year. Doesn't this mean that the public schools need to get more federal funding and oversight so that they can maintain the progress that Head Start initiated?
Oversight. There's that word again. Oversight for kids in school comes from the parents. It doesn't come from Washington, D.C. Department of Education grows and grows and spends more money and spends more money. And our test scores, as I think you did this trifecta a couple of months ago, test scores are flat or declining. You put our kids up against kids from other countries in math and science, the kind of stuff Head Start is supposed to help with. And the terribleness of how our kids do is frightening for the future of this country. So yeah, we need reform, but it's not more money, it's not more spending, it is more oversight, and that's parental involvement, and that means taking power away from Washington by eliminating the Department of Education.
Well, Bill, in his first inaugural address, President Obama promised to cut wasteful spending and to put science in its proper place. Now that scientific research has shown that Head Start has a negligible impact as measured by its own goals, how can the Republicans help the president to put science in its place?
Well, science is the golden calf of liberalism when the statistics, no matter how thin they may be, prove their point, but when they don't prove their point, then it's just utterly and simply ignored. And the people who have skepticism about the proper place of science, extremely useful in things like determining chemical reactions or perhaps trying to determine the distance of a star by its relative redshift. That's a profoundly useful area for science. But when it comes to making kids do better in school, turns out science is not really such a great predictor of anything after all. Imagine my surprise. I've been a scientist. I know what science can do and what it can't do. Scott, the whole world we live in, this country anyway, has become a giant madhouse where everything that we know is true we're told is not true, and vice versa. We live now in a world where ideology trumps realism, ideology trumps common sense, ideology trumps facts, ideology trumps experience. Ideology trumps what you see with your own lion eyes, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And that's why the only answer we have is parallel structures. If you think that this whole thing is hooey, because it is hooey, you need to get your kids out of these programs and get them either homeschooled or find other groups of people who have your common values about cause and effect, the reality of the world as it is, and get your kids out of this horrible, expensive nightmare and get them an education, because then other kids will be working for your kids.
Well, you know, government is so predictable that we don't even have to wonder what will happen when an $8 billion per year program is proven ineffective. Funding will increase. Of course. Not only that, but Democrats will say that the public schools also need more funding and more federal guidance in order to retain the gains made during Head Start. Oh, sure, there will be talk of holding the program to higher standards, but that will simply mean more money for teachers, more money for training, more money for bureaucrats, facilities, curriculum, and Kleenex. Ultimately, local schools and states will have less control over education, and in the name of saving Head Start, parents in greater numbers will surrender their children to federal government socialization earlier than ever and for even more time every day. So, are you ready to run for office yet? How bad does it have to get before you set aside your fears, swallow your pride, and get involved? For Bill Whittle, Stephen Green, and the entire Trifecta crew at PJTV.com, I'm Scott Ott.